There you go. Do it. Do it. Oh! There you go. And keep the good man down. That walk backward. And push him in the water. Quickly. There he goes. Whoa! There she is. Woo!
Whew. Wow, that was a kind of scary, the countdown and everything. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the weekly briefing on Japanese politics. Timothy is here again with us. And if you're looking for reliable, up-to-date, concise information on what is going on within Japan's political scene, well, this is the place you need to be. And thanks a lot for joining us. Timothy Langley gives us an encapsulation of the week's events covering the Japanese government affairs and public policy, policy imperatives, the economic, geopolitics, and diplomacy. So these are all words that are difficult to pronounce, but I hope that you don't mind me stumbling over them. And, well, as you already know, Timothy is uniquely situated to provide meaningful insight and analysis and walk difficult issues through the political and bureaucratic maze of Japan. Well, and he does this on a daily basis at his work and on behalf of foreign companies. I believe that some of you have already been his clients. He has worked for chambers of commerce, multinationals, and also diplomatic missions. So, Timothy, thank you very much for sharing the insight and your experience with us. And I know that talking about politics is really not what you do for a living, but in your daily work, so you interact with a unique network of individuals, and those individuals influence policy decisions. They impact what happens in Japan, and that's why you're able to also deliver these briefings to us every Sunday morning. So the briefings are for free, and everybody who is watching us, thanks a lot for that. Well, Timothy, now it's to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Maya. Good morning, everybody, here in Japan and elsewhere throughout the world. I know that you're joining the show because you're interested in what's going on in Japanese politics. And like Maya said, we deliver it to you in weekly chunk size bites. What's happened over the last 5-6 days that's important to you on a business, as an institution, as a chamber, whatever. Things have happened so quickly. And when Maya and I first started this initiative 3 years ago, it was unsure. I was unsure if I had enough to fill every week, and boy, it just has not stopped. And it might be that we're just getting better at searching out the information and delivering it to you, but the pace has changed and the pace has really increased. But I really appreciate you, the audience, for joining us. We get comments and suggestions and encouragement every week, and I really appreciate that. So please keep that coming. I'm reporting to you today from the sailing port of Ota. It's on the Chiba coast. If you look behind me, that is the point of the Yokohama Peninsula. The farthest point over here is going to be Misaki, and probably right around right over here is Mount Fuji, and you might see it come out of the clouds as the briefing continues. Let me give you just an encapsulation of some of the important things that are going on and then turn it over to Maya before we get into the real beef of the briefing. But you probably, if you're following the news, you heard that the Prime Minister Kishida, definitively closed down his faction officially. He turned the key, he locked the door, he gave the key to the realtor, he registered with the agency that is in charge of managing political factions, and he says, "I'm out of here. We're out of this business." And this is a big deal. I know that the Abe faction has done the same thing, and also the Moriyama faction. The faction that Mr. Motegi belongs to has not made that move, has not announced yet. Neither has the Aso faction. So that's a pretty big deal, and we're going to get into that later in the briefing. The reform legislation passed the lower house on Thursday. A big deal. The Prime Minister wanted it to pass on Tuesday, 2 days after our last briefing. I predicted that he would be coming in really strong and trying to pass this legislation. He didn't, because there were a couple of hiccups, but it passed the lower house now. It is now in the upper house, and probably it will be reviewed and passed into legislation on the last day of the diet session, which is in less than 2 weeks. Wage negotiations and inflation continue unabated. The Bank of Japan is unlikely to raise interest rates or do anything of that sort. The yen is standing steady at around $157 to the yen. It looks like the Bank of Japan and the Ministry of Finance are going to hold the course for the time being. Maya, I can hear you strangling your cat. Can you turn your mic off, please? Thank you. Poor cat. The diet is going to end in less than 14 days, in less than 2 weeks. There are a couple of bills that surprisingly the Prime Minister wants to push through. Surprisingly. The diet has been consumed with this kickback reform legislation, and it hasn't gotten to the bills that it should have gotten to. There's one in particular that might strike you as out of context, constitutional revision. Constitutional revision is a very big deal, very difficult, requires 2/3 in the lower house, 2/3 in the upper house to pass that legislation, and then a national referendum. And it seems that the Prime Minister, because he promised it early in his administration that he was going to take care of constitutional revision in his term, he's never really gotten off the ground on that, but he's still committed to attempting to do that. It doesn't look like it's going to go. Also, the bill on imperial succession could be a topic of conversation. I don't think there's enough time in the next 2 weeks to push that through the legislation. Isshin no Kai is the opposition party based in Osaka, is cozying up very aggressively maybe is the word to be used with the LDP, but it's cozying up with the LDP in ways that we had thought maybe were not possible 3 or 4 weeks ago. And that's because of this legislation on financial collection, financial distribution of funds that are collected for political activities. So Isshin is making inroads there. Komeito is the former coalition partner of the LDP, as you know. They're getting a little bit antsy about this closeness, but I think it's all in a grand design that the Prime Minister wants to shore up his forces in the event that there could be a snap election, although that looks almost totally unlikely now. But at least he's looking forward to succeeding himself as Prime Minister when his term ends. Succeeding himself as president of the LDP when his term comes to an end at the end of September. And right now, it looks like there will be no snap election. The word on the street is the LDP is just limping along and bleeding too heavily. The Prime Minister is not going to use his authority to make a snap election. The opposition parties could come together and form a no confidence motion. The likelihood is small, but it is possible. And let me see, if you're reading in the papers things that are going on with the population growth or the defense treaties or the United States setting up a potential of 4-star general rank officer in Tokyo or the Indo-Pacific headquarters, if you're reading in the newspaper, it's already been decided, it's already in motion. So the newspapers typically lag maybe a month behind the actual reality of what's going on. And I catch this every time because the things that we've reported on show up in the newspaper 2 or 3 weeks later, and I see that all the time. But you're the smart one for joining us, and I appreciate your contributions, joining the one-on-one portion, and letting Maya know you have a question or you have a comment, or I said something wrong, you want to point that out, because I don't have all the answers. But like Maya said, I'm deeply entrenched. I'm doing this on a daily basis, and as a contribution to you and just to keep things lively, reporting on Japanese politics, and I hope you appreciate it. So let me see. That's the headlines, Maya. Back to you. I love it when your mic is off. We can't hear your cat screaming anymore.
Okay, here we go. Yes. That's because of the cat. It's not because of you. All right. And so before we continue with, the details of all the topics that Timothy mentioned so far, I would like to give a shout out to our sponsors. sponsors, yes, who made this program possible. And well, if you really want to buy real estate or sell real estate in Tokyo and Kanagawa, and you need bilingual support, Kanchu.com is the place to go. Kanchu.com offers bilingual services, and they work with individuals who want to buy and sell houses and homes and property here in Tokyo and in Yokohama as well. The company also does property management and investment property. And if you want to work with them, which I strongly recommend, you need to contact James Howell at james@kanachu.com or connect with James on LinkedIn. Well, that's for the moment the plug I did. And with that, Timothy, it's once again on to you.
Thank you very much, Maya. And just on cue, it seems like I'm getting a little bit of drizzle. I know that's going to please you to
Right.
no end, Maya. The Prime
Oh,
Minister,
yes.
yes. Getting back to the news, the Prime Minister is unlikely to close down the lower house and call for a general election. You're still on mic. There you go. Thank you. Is unlikely to call for a snap election. It's just the LDP is just in such a disarray. And in running an election campaign without the typical factions to distribute choice positions to, cabinet posts, that sort of thing, at the end of an election, it really is anybody's guess how an election is going to turn out. And especially if you're prime minister, you want to continue to be prime minister when everybody gets voted back into office. The current calculation now is if the LDP held an election today, they would probably lose around 60 seats. They can afford to lose maybe 40 or 50 and still have a majority in the lower house. And the problem that they have with that is right now we've gone through this reform legislation, as you're aware. And the reason why it's taken so long is because the LDP by itself can pass legislation in the lower house, but once it goes to the upper house, they don't have 50%. They need a coalition partner. And with the reform legislation, Komeito was holding the LDP's feet to the fire and said, we want you to be more transparent. We don't want you to be collecting all of this money and it's secret, and 200,000 yen per incident, per individual as the threshold. That needs to be closer to zero. We would accept 50,000, but your compromise is 100,000. It just doesn't make sense. And the opposition party says, there should be no calculation, that you are not allowed to report to the tax authorities any donations that come in from your breakfast parties or your study groups. That should be reported as income to you. And although it's political funding, it shouldn't be concealed. Eventually, they came to terms with that, but they can only come to terms with it in order for it to pass the upper house. So it passed the lower house on Thursday. Now it goes to the upper house, and the fight is not yet done. Komeito and Ishin came together. Ishin got a couple of bites at the apple. They got a couple of concessions from the LDP. And since they've decided to hold back a little bit, the LDP must give them something in return. We don't know exactly what that is, but I suspect it's probably concessions with regard to the expo and how money is being spent from the central government there. The central government, the cost for the expo is 1/3 by the central government, 1/3 by the Osaka government, and 1/3 by local businesses in Osaka. And they're having a real difficulty there. We've discussed this before. It's less than a year away before the 6-month expo starts. And if the expo goes swimmingly well, not only does Osaka benefit from that, but also Ishin does, because Ishin dominates Osaka. So probably that is where part of the rub is. And also, since in the by-elections, the Constitutional Democratic Party did so well, Ishin is really getting worried. They want to be the biggest opposition party. They're not. They're number 3. The LDP is biggest. The Constitutional Democratic Party is second. The Ishin no Kai is third. And fourth is Komeito. So Ishin wants to begin to retract some of this power that the Constitutional Democratic Party has amassed. And similarly, so does the LDP. They want to diminish the Constitutional Democratic Party. You'll remember that this time last week was the election for Minato-ku, one of the 23 wards of Tokyo. There was an election for mayor, and the individual who won that race was not LDP sponsored or endorsed. She was an independent, and she was Renho's former secretary who ran for office. Renho is a candidate for governor of Tokyo from the Constitutional Democratic Party. So you could probably make a good guess that she's from the Constitutional Democratic Party, not from Ishin. So that means that if you count it all out, including the Shizuoka governor race, which the LDP also lost, the Constitutional Democratic Party has won 5 elections, 5 regional elections, 3 of them national in the by-election, and won them straight. The Constitutional Democratic Party, the LDP, didn't win any of them. 5 elections in a row. So that is also the other thing that's causing the prime minister to think twice about it. So the most, and we talk about this all the time, and I apologize for going back and forth. There's possibly going to be a snap election. The prime minister is not thinking about that. He's thinking about that. It now looks unwise to call for a snap election. The most likely scenario is that he's going to reshuffle his cabinet. He kind of needs to. Excuse me. The disputes between him and his deputy prime minister, Taro Aso, and his secretary general of the LDP, Mr. Motegi, is so bad, it's reported that they're not even talking to each other. This last gambit that the prime minister pulled pretty much unilaterally without reporting to anybody on Tuesday of this week was in his negotiations with Ishin no Kai to sign off on the legislation, the reform legislation for political funding. The LDP had their position, they formed their position, they presented their position to Komeito and to Ishin. They were rock solid on it, and the prime minister, on his own volition, renegotiated it in the last hour in order to get this passed through the lower house on Thursday, just 2 days ago. So this has really incensed many of the younger members of the LDP who depend on the funding that they get from all of these political parties. The LDP, these political parties, it's the lifeblood of the LDP and all of the factions that are comprised of the LDP. And as you know, I attend maybe 4 or 5 of them a week as a component of my business. It's part of how you do politics in this country. So, and it also, attending so many briefings allows me to give you an update on what's going on inside Japanese politics every Sunday. But the point here is that the prime minister is increasingly isolated. He is prime minister. He's the top dog on the pyramid. But Mr. Aso is not very favorably inclined, and neither is Mr. Motegi. So you've got former Prime Minister Mr. Suga, who doesn't like Taro Kono very well. They are both from Kanagawa. He doesn't want Kono Taro to become Prime Minister. Motegi maybe, but not many people like Motegi in the LDP as a potential candidate. Taro Aso is 83 years old. He is unlikely to run as Prime Minister. So there are some contenders. Mr. Ishiba has made several pronouncements about his readiness. He's had a very important dinner with Mr. Koizumi, a previous prime minister, and Mr. Kato, who was a very big wig, longtime LDP stalwart, on making his candidacy more and more viable in a bid against the prime minister. I think it's fair to say that the LDP is kind of through with the current prime minister. They want to change, but they can't force it nicely and still maintain some kind of posture with the public. And really, the decision rests with the prime minister. And so likely nothing's going to happen until the party election for president at the end of September. Mr. Motegi, as the most likely candidate to replace him or to challenge him, is the Secretary General. He pretty much controls how that election process might evolve. but the prime minister has final say. So there's likely to be a real fight there. The diet will end on the 23rd. It might be extended. The prime minister has not made any noise about that. In fact, he said, I don't intend to extend the diet. If there is an extension of the diet, the most likely outcome of that is that it will be extended so that it coincides somewhat with the election of a Tokyo governor. So the governor's race culminates on July 7th. Ms. Koike has not announced her candidacy yet. She's done this in the past. She's waited 6 days until the election starts. But you've already seen the large boards that are in many neighborhoods of Tokyo. They have 32 blank places for a poster board that has the face of the candidate. There are currently about 23 candidates. It might increase a little bit more. It should increase at least by one. I believe Ms. Koike will throw her hat in. But Renho is on charge, and she is going to give the governor a real fight for that office. I think she's a good candidate. I think she's very popular in Tokyo. I think she stands a good chance of becoming our next governor. But I think also the current governor, beating an incumbent is difficult under even poor circumstances. And Ms. Koike has done a marvelous job with running Tokyo for the last 2 election cycles. So that's 12 years. So let's see how that rolls out. The emperor and the empress, Naruhito, will have a state visit on June 22nd. It's in less than 2 weeks. They'll be in England for about 2 weeks. He is the head of state, and he's the only one that can have a state visit. Mr. Kishida went to visit Joe Biden maybe 2 months ago, a month and a half ago. And it's not quite a state visit, although he's the prime minister, he's not the head of state. The emperor is the formal head of state, as it says in the Constitution. So this is a pretty big deal. The emperor has not been in England on a state visit, except one other time previous to COVID. So this is a big deal, and it's worthy of following, especially in light of this this idea of imperial succession, because the emperor and the empress have a daughter, not a son, and there's always this discussion about a male heir. That's what the current contemporary expectation is, but it could be changed. The Diet approves the internal treaty on next generation fighters. You know that there is a trilateral research and development manufacturing agreement between England, Italy, and Japan to make the next generation fighter. And it passed the lower house maybe a month and a half ago. It just passed the upper house with a couple of tweaks to the way the regulations are going to be implemented. But this is the Global Combat Air Program. It's the first for Japan. It is offensive and defensive in nature. It is going to replace the F-35s, which is the state-of-the-art aircraft that's used predominantly in the United States, and a version of it is used with the self-defense forces here in Japan. But with this 3-country development program, they are going to be replacing all of the jets. Probably in 2035 is their production date and rollout. But this really scratches Article 9 of the Constitution, where it says that Japan shall not possess nor export offensive weaponry. And this is really scratching up against that. So the fact that the Prime Minister wants to deal with constitutional revision, it is appropriate. Japan has already gone way past what the Constitution restricts it to do, and it needs to be addressed. I just don't think it's going to happen with this Prime Minister, but it will be an issue. It's worthy of discussing when we have our Q&A, but it's very deep and rich. The Paris Games start on July 26th, a little bit more than a month from here. Toyota has backed out of sponsorship. They had a 4 Olympic sponsorship contract with the Olympic Organizing Committee, and they purchased that for Olympic sponsorship for a total of about $835 million. And it has decided that it doesn't like the way the IOC spends its money, particularly what happened in Tokyo. Its last sponsorship will be in Paris in less than 2 weeks. It starts. A lot of going on in Paris, a lot to look forward to. This is somewhat similar to the Expo. Expos are beginning to fall a little bit out of favor. It's not because of the graft, but mostly because of the impact that it has and how much it costs. So the Osaka Expo is suffering because all of the pavilions that they wanted the individual countries to build for the 6-month program, the countries didn't come in and pony up, and they didn't submit their architectural plans. And so there's a fear in Osaka and in the central government, but mostly in Osaka, that the Expo won't be attracting the 26 million visitors that is anticipated over the 6 months. They've begun to issue free tickets to school children throughout Osaka and on school trips so that they can come in. So you can tell that there's a little bit of trepidation there. And that is why my guess is when Ishin came to the prime minister and said, we will support you on your bid to reduce the tensions for this kickback scandal, but we want a little bit of a little bit of love and affection as a consequence. And, Osaka's Expo is a big deal for us. So how about some concessions there? You won't really know what those discussions are, but you can read the tea leaves and make some good assessments of that. Let me see. The Tokyo Olympics cost $13 billion. Half of that came from the public. The IOC contribution was $1.8 billion, and the rest of it came from Tokyo and public funds. Dentsu raised $3.3 billion in local sponsorship, separate from what the top sponsors provided. And Dentsu is not only Dentsu, but also former Prime Minister Mori is also embroiled in the controversy of how this money was distributed, who got the sweet spots, who got the sponsorships, who got to, make the team uniforms, that sort of thing. He resigned not as a consequence directly of how the money was being spent. He resigned as a consequence of a different aspect of his personal activity. But the investigation still continues there about where all that money went and who got the money in their pocket. Currently, the top sponsors, I'm going to read who the sponsors are, their household names. It is just not going to include Toyota anymore. Airbnb, Alibaba, let me see, Bridgestone, Coke, Deloitte, Intel, Omega, Panasonic, Procter & Gamble, Samsung, and Visa are top sponsors. You'll see their ads rolling all of the time in the Olympic promotions and on paper publications as well. But currently, right now, it's not going to include Toyota in the next Olympics, and I'm not sure where that is going to be. I should have been prepared for that. I'm sorry. The yen right now is standing at $156.73 to the yen. It has remained stable. As we reported last week, it was the last couple of days of the month, and that's when the Bank of Japan is, the Bank of Japan is required to submit details of how they spent their money over the previous month. So there's a little bit of a lag time. And during this lag time, that's when the yen was bolstered by an investment, a tremendous investment, many suspected coming from the Bank of Japan. And those reports were confirmed when they released their official documentation. And yes, indeed, the amount of yen was 9.8 trillion yen. That's larger than what happened 2 years ago when there was an intervention. It was a shockingly large intervention. This one is a little bit larger. That equates to about 62.7 billion US dollars spent over a span of about a week. It did have an impact at the time that the Japanese government moved on intervention very secretly, but not to spook the markets, but to support the yen. the yen was standing at 160.17 to the yen. It was the highest in 35 years. The Japanese government felt like they had to do something drastic, even though Janet Yellen wagged her finger and said, don't do anything unilaterally. You need to have, cohesion with other G7 members. So don't do anything rash, but they did. The yen improved 5 yen April 29th. And then there was another infusion. It went to 157, from 157 to 153 on May 1st. And now it's stabilized more towards the 157. But that's a lot of money to get that kind of a return. But the Japanese government is determined to project the yen's strength and the yen's stability in international markets. It really has an impact on the cost of imports here, and the amount of investment funds, and also tourism dollars that come in. So it's a continuing game of cat and mouse. The foreign currency reserves was the source of where the money came from. They still have Japan has tremendous foreign currency reserves, and that's where they're pulling that money out of. You think that there's a lot that they could have done in the economy with $9 trillion yen. But people in the Bank of Japan and the foreign ministry have, they're smart people. They know what they're doing. So hopefully we're getting out of this morass. The economy starts to pick up. Wages begin to keep track with inflation. There is a little bit of squishiness there. The spending rate has continued to decline. Household spending has continued to decline, even as we're moving into the summer months. So with that, Maya, I'm sure there are other questions and probably some things that people would like more clarification on. So I'd like to move on to your Q&A.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the insights again, Timothy. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Oof, that's good. Okay, so there are a few questions actually at the moment, and they are spread over 3 different platforms. So thank you very much to everybody who posed them. Before we go into the Q&A session, I would like to give.
I would like to hear from our sponsors.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was going to say. Thanks for that. And our next sponsor is Houze Inc. Houze Incorporated, and the company offers bilingual services in custom home design, construction, and renovation, plus commercial building construction. In order to benefit from their services, you need to connect with Hannah Uruchizawa Howell, and she's available on LinkedIn, and all the links will be available as well, or they're still already available in the description of this video on YouTube, so feel free to do that, and thanks a lot to our sponsor. Timothy, now I'm going to start with the questions. I hope that you are not going to melt there, because I know that it is starting to rain, and yes.
Can you tell from the video a little
Well,
bit?
I can. Yes, I can tell that, and
Okay.
hopefully it's not going to pour.
No, it's not
Or
going to pour. The sun is trying to come out. You really can't make out Mount Fuji in the distance yet, but still, we've got half an hour of Q&A, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of heat and light generated. So let's get in.
right. Okay, so the first question comes from Clubhouse, and it is from Cam. Cam writes, my question is about Kishida's announcement to swiftly draw up an active cyber defense bill. When would such legislation be likely to be introduced and pass?
That's a great question, Cam. Thank you very much. I see that you're in Japan once again. It's always good to see you. They passed this legislation for the advanced jet fighter about a year ago. It was in the lower house. Then they just passed it in the upper house. So that happened over a span of maybe 9 months to pass that legislation. It was in the works for quite a while. People didn't hear much about it, and then it became a topic of conversation once it was being discussed in committee. So for legislation to go through the process, this reform legislation, for example, with the kickback scandal, That has all happened within the span of 3 months, maybe 4 months. And it's come up as a consequence of a lot of different things, probably triggered by the assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. I think it's all this cascading effect of that and how the LDP counts money and collects money and spends money and reports on its money. All of that has happened as a consequence of that, and the Unification Church as well. And so the prime minister was really under the gun. So legislation can happen pretty quickly. The prime minister has passed this legislation through the lower house. It goes to the upper house, and he has said, I am hoping that we can pass this legislation by the final day of this legislative session, which is the 23rd. That's in less than 2 weeks, Cam. So it can happen on an accelerated basis when they want it to, or when the prime minister wants it to. But yeah, the process is usually very slow, very meaningful. It involves a lot of moving parts, but if there's a push behind it, and this legislation on the kickback scandal is pretty much just self-serving for the LDP. So the LDP wants it, the prime minister wants it, and the prime minister has said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to clean up the LDP so that you can feel like you want to elect me again. So as a consequence of that, other laws, other bills, and legislation has gone on hold. So a lot of bills are being pushed off to the next diet session, which could be a supplemental extraordinary diet session after the president is selected for the LDP in the fall, or it could just roll over until the new formal legislative session in January. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
Okay, thank you. But we also know that when bills are pushed through, there is always a lot of work left to be done afterwards because, well, let's say that they are not perfect, right? When work is done in such a short
That's right.
time, it's really tough to get it right the first time. So I imagine that even if they manage to pass that bill in the next, well, 2 to 3 weeks, probably the policies there they will be changing on the way forward because it's arguably it is a very important bill and it's going to impact a lot of well a lot of industries and also let's say companies here as well.
You would think, but
Mhm.
this particular bill, it's not starting from scratch. Like you said, they don't get it right the first time, maybe the second time or the third time. This is a revision of a law that's currently in process, and they're tweaking at the edges because the LDP has been able to work the system to its advantage, and that advantage now has become obvious to everybody, and so they want to hammer down on it. So it's not like the creation of a new bill. It's just a particular components of the bill. So a little
Okay.
bit easier this time around.
Right. Thank you for the clarification for that. We have, okay, a couple of other comments before that. Yuka, yes, you're very welcome to ask your 2 questions. Please join us in Clubhouse to do that.
Oh
Or
God.
or if you have learned to type faster, you can do that on LinkedIn as well. So we're waiting for them. All right. So the next question comes from YouTube from Hiroaki. And while we were talking about, well, the candidates for prime minister, Hiroaki wrote, what about Mr. Suga as vice prime minister?
As vice prime minister, sure.
Yes,
Yeah,
sure.
you mean deputy prime minister?
Deputy, yes.
Yeah, that's possible. It would be, um, yeah, he would have to be a critical component in getting the prime minister elected. He would have to be like his right hand man, like Taro Aso was with Mr. Kishida. So it is one of the benefits you get for being a sponsor or a supporter, without whose endorsement you probably wouldn't have become prime minister. Alternatively, you become secretary general, or you become foreign minister, or you become speaker of the house, or something like that. But yeah, deputy prime minister is pretty big. I think, depending on your age and how many times you've been in the diet, there are other positions that might be more attractive. Um, these ministerial positions are closer to money, closer to the distribution of the budget, the money that is dedicated according to law to various components of the industry or to the economy. And so being close to that helps you solidify your political position, but it also helps you economically too. It shouldn't, but it sure as the hell does. So it really depends on a lot of different things. Deputy Prime Minister is a big deal. Taro Aso has been Deputy Prime Minister throughout the entire Abe administration. He was Prime Minister before Mr. Abe. And then many people would say, as a consequence of Mr. Aso's poor handling or its poor reputation, the LDP fell from grace. The Democratic Party came in for 3 years, and then Mr. Abe resurfaced and brought Mr. Aso along with him. Previous to being Prime Minister, Taro Aso was a long-serving finance minister. So that seems to make a lot of sense in terms of, doing favors, collecting political capital, and that sort of thing. I don't want to go on too deeply on that session, but you kind of catch my drift, right?
Right. No, I mean, I get it why you talk about Mr. Aso and so on, but well, we also know that he has been in media, and the media have reported on his stances on different issues, but we haven't heard anything about Mr. Suga.
Yes, he's
So,
been very quiet.
and it is very curious. And if we didn't know that he was still there, one might think people who don't follow politics, they might think, oh, is he still in the diet, or what happened to him? Is he still alive even?
But
Right.
he's kind of like that. The reason why he rose in prominence was because when Mr. Abe was in bed sick and he had resigned as being prime minister because he was so ill, it was Mr. Suga who was by his bedside, always encouraging him. He wasn't even a member of Mr. Abe's faction. He's just an independent. And rewarded him with that dedication, that consistency, that kind of support that he got above and beyond what anybody in the Abe faction apparently was giving to the prime minister. So it's yeah, and that's his personality. He's not so flamboyant. When you see him at the podium or making policy pronouncements, it's a bit of a snooze fest because he's not a dynamic public speaker. But I think he wields a lot of political power. I don't think he's in the game, certainly not to become prime minister again. Maybe as kingmaker, and that's where I would put Taro Aso as well. As a kingmaker, Taro Aso is not going to run for prime minister. If there is an election or when there is an election for the lower house, he's 83. He'll probably run one more time, but maybe not after that. So he's got to have his son coming in and take over his faction. His faction is not being disbanded, probably won't be disbanded. And as a consequence of that, in the environment where there are no other factions, so there's the Motegi faction, there's the Aso faction, everybody else, at least they will vote en bloc. They probably, many in the Abe faction, the former Abe faction, will likewise vote en bloc. And that's why Mr. Hagiura is very prominently invited to this party with Mr. Koizumi and Mr. Shigeru Ishiba, and this discussion about who is going to be replacing the current prime minister behind closed doors, that sort of thing. So it's all a very rich mix, and you're never going to understand it unless you just continue to watch this show. And I say the same names over and over again. That's what makes it a little bit easier when you're following Japanese politics, because it's the same people. It might be 15 or 20 people that are influential, that are moving this, but they stay influential throughout most of the career. So it pays to pay attention, remember people's names, remember their history and their heritage, and their political profiles.
Right. Well, thank you for that, for those comments. And also, we have basically we have a correction on LinkedIn. Sorry, I apologize for this. From Julian Smith, who helped us with a small detail. So it is about the trilateral program, about the jet fighters. So he wrote, I think the three-country fighter program, Tempest in the UK, it is called, will replace the F-2 ground attack aircraft based on the F-16 and not the F-35, which is only just entering service now. So
Okay, thank you.
yeah, thank you very much for this, for the correction, Julian. Thank you for the.
Also,
Yes.
Julian's up to speed on this, so Julian probably knows this too. I didn't really get into it when I was doing my briefing on it. Is that the the legislation that was passed this week in the upper house allocates the distribution of how the export controls will be implemented by this three country distribution of this military asset. And the headquarters of the control arm of the three country fighter jet program will be in London, and the first president will be a Japanese national, and then it'll be on a rotating basis. So, in fact, come 2036 or 2037, when they start selling these advanced jets, there's going to be, if the issue hadn't been solved by then, there's going to be a real constitutional challenge about Japan participating in export of offensive weaponry. Thanks, Julian.
Thank you for that. Well, and we continue. So, Hiroko-san, thank you for joining us from Hawaii. I know, yes, Hawaii has been traditionally a very strong destination for the Japanese overseas travelers. So it is wonderful to know that you are there and you're still listening to us. Thanks a lot for that.
Thank you.
And thank you, Ryan, for, I know that you're busy, you wrote that, but we appreciate your being here. Timothy is trying to locate Mount Fuji and show it, but unfortunately the clouds are not cooperating this morning. Maybe later. Let's see what happens. And okay, so we have two questions on LinkedIn as well from Rumiko. And okay, the first one, I'm going with the first one. Okay, the first one is about regarding the Reform Legislation Act for Political Funds. Do you happen to know when the effective date of the bill passed by the lower house is? When will the bill implemented in practice or put into
That's a
practice?
that's a great question, and I know where you're going with this because certain components of the reform legislation kick in immediately. The LDP now must reduce the amount of money any individual contributes from 20,000. They must report anybody that contributes over 20,000, 200,000. That's a company or an individual to any single political event that they join. Now that is going down to 50,000, and that will kick in effectively, I believe, once the revisions are passed. There's another component there that says when diet men receive money from the LDP, they receive maybe 1,000,000 yen a month, and they can spend that any way they want. And people said you need to revise that LDP. That's just unfair. My political party doesn't do that. We don't distribute 1,000,000 yen to our diet members who belong to our political party. And when we do have that kind of contribution, it must be represented by receipts, how they spent that money. And the LDP doesn't do that and doesn't want to do that. So the fight that happened this week with the LDP and Ishin, so the LDP brought Ishin in because they wanted to scare Komeito. Komeito was saying, well, we want it a little bit tighter, and the LDP said, we'll go it alone. Well, we don't need you in the lower house. We need you in the upper house, but we'll do it alone, and we're going to bring in Ishin. So Ishin is bigger than you are anyway, so maybe we'll have a coalition with them too. And the point that Ishin wanted was you must report how you use those funds. You LDP bigwigs, you guys, you fat cats, when you get the money from the party, you can spend the money, you just need to report how you spent it so it's justified as a political fund. You're actually using it for political activities. And the LDP eventually agreed, and then they demurred, and then eventually they said, okay, we'll do it, but that kicks in 10 years, okay? And that's what they agreed on. And so the LDP is going, whoo, that's great. We'll do it, but we'll do it in 10 years' time. So I think that's where you're going with this one, Rumiko, but a very astute observation. It was a big fight on Tuesday. It meant that the Prime Minister couldn't complete his negotiations on Tuesday. He had to push it through to Thursday and pass the legislation then.
All right, so thank you for the answer. And I'm going on with the second question. It is about Japan joining the International Monetary Fund. Is there any pressure on Japan to go for IMF, the International Monetary Fund, I believe it is, or other international standards, um, because their decision making is recognized as unique in the eye of the
Yeah.
globe.
Yeah. I'm not too familiar. Who's this question from?
Rumiko.
Okay, yeah, Rumiko, you're very much seeped in the financial part. I don't know much about this issue if they're going that direction. I know that the Japan is an outlier among the G7, and even if you include the G20, it's probably still an outlier. They're trying to homogenize. The United States is trying to homogenize this, and maybe force the um, ministry or the Japanese government to submit to the uh, uh, International Monetary Fund. It probably is a good idea. I don't know. I'm just not that familiar with it. It's like NATO. Japan should be a member of NATO, but it's not in Europe. NATO is Europe specific, but it is a military power, probably the third or fourth largest military. If it was an army, if the self-defense forces was an army, it'd probably be the fourth largest army in the world. But yeah, it's complicated.
It is. And I'm sorry, I have to apologize because I'm not into the financial world as well. So sometimes I need time and to interpret the questions and
Yep.
also make sense of them. So thanks a lot for that, for your patience, Rumiko. I appreciate that. And we've got Yuka. Yuka, omatase shimashita. I'm sorry
It's
for
okay.
saying
I
this.
know. And then I have to pause. How do I respond? How do Do itashimashite doesn't sound okay, but okay, no problems. How's that?
Thank you.
I don't know the Japanese version of it. So I have two quick questions, and then the people, by the time that I'm done with this, we may be lucky enough to see the top of Mount Fuji. How's that?
Right.
So both of the questions quickly on the Tokyo. I thought it's kind of interesting because Timothy, you didn't really touch on the third candidate. I think he's a guy from Oita Prefecture, and I didn't know you could run for Tokyo governor even though you don't reside in Tokyo. Or I may be wrong on this, but I think it's Toyo Keizai. The financial publication, they were discussing this third guy may be using one issue to run for the governorship in Tokyo. The issue is furusato nōzei, and the ChatGPT gave me the translation, hometown tax payment. Does this sound right to you guys?
Yes.
Hometown tax payment, yes.
Yes.
Okay, so even if you don't live in that particular prefecture, you can send your tax payment instead of the locale that you reside in, and then you get some sort of a gift
Yes.
in return of tax payment, right? That's the furusato nōzei.
Yes, that's the system.
I didn't know that Tokyo weren't part of the system. Maybe Tokyo said, oh, we don't need this. We have enough people that we get enough tax revenues. Is that right?
Yes, Tokyo is not part of the system.
Is Tokyo is part of the system?
No,
It's
no,
not.
it is not.
Is it not right? So it could be that sort of like a sticky point that he can run on. Is this issue is big enough for Tokyo residents?
Okay, I don't think it is. The Tokyo governorship is a popularity contest. That's why Renho stands a good chance because she has an appealing personality. She was a commentator, a television commentator, so she can speak very well. She's 57 years old. She's much younger than the 71-year-old Koike. Um, uh, and it's really a popularity contest. It's a way that you can gain notoriety. That's why there are 23 candidates for it. A lot of these people understand that they're not going to be elected as a governor, but their name is on all these boards and the government is paying for it. It doesn't cost that much to become a candidate for governor. It's a couple of $1,000s. And as a consequence of that, as a candidate, you get all of this publicity. You got TV time, you get your face plastered everywhere. And if you're serious about it, you're going to spend your money. You're going to spend a couple of $1,000,000 in a campaign if you're serious about it. But if you're not, you're still getting publicity. Your book might get sold a little bit more. You're going to get speaking engagements and that sort of thing. But I don't think Furusato nōzei is a program that is going to appeal to enough people to overcome what Renho or what the current governor Koike has. That being said,
Can I run for the
go
governor?
ahead. What's that?
Run for the governor?
You can. If you're,
I can?
if you're, I think that if you're a resident of Japan, yes, and a
Oh.
Japanese citizen,
Yeah.
by nationality, yes.
Oh.
But there is also, if you don't mind me adding a little bit, because I have a lot of friends who are actually participating and they are benefiting from the Furusato nōzei system. So Tokyo is, the whole idea was that when they introduced the system, they meant it as one of the measures to revitalize the economy in local areas.
Yeah.
So that was, a policy that the central government thought would be really good for the revitalization there. And Tokyo is, being one of the biggest metropolis centers in the world, metropolitan centers in the world, does not
So
need
they
the
don't
money.
need it. Is that right?
They
Yeah.
don't need it. Tokyo is already one of the richest cities in the world as well, because of the concentration of the population, and also the tax that all the companies and all the individuals who live here pay. So basically the whole idea was to redirect some of the tax that is paid here in Tokyo to the local areas. And also it helps people think about those local areas as potential place, where they can retire or where they can do business as well, and places that they want to support and so on. So these were the ideas when the whole system was being put together, and when they introduced it. And that's why basically Tokyo is not part of it. It is a part of it as as a provider of funds, right?
Yeah.
Not as a receiver of funds. Yes. Okay.
Right, but I think it's kind of, the system is it's been going on for like I don't know, 5-7 years.
More than that.
Some issues there, but I'm not going to dwell on it. But
yeah.
Well, let me know when I should move on to the different question. Next question, if I can.
Oh yes, please do.
Thank you. By the way, can I comment? Oh, Hiroko-san joining from Hawaii. That's a dedication, don't you think?
Yes, it is.
It's probably afternoon in Honolulu on Saturday.
Yeah.
And you are listening in about Japan politics. My hat off to you. Seriously.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hiroko-san. Yes.
Yeah.
Maya has tremendous global pull.
Definitely.
Only if it were me, right? Yes. Sorry, you interrupt. Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Also, because when you told us about your podcast, Tokyo on Fire, Timothy, I'm like, oh my gosh, I love that term. Because Tokyo it's not really Tokyo is burning. It's like Tokyo is cool. Tokyo is, that's what the Tokyo on Fire, right? But have you heard of the program? I just heard this and I thought that was kind of interesting, and I want to, get the take on you guys. Take all of you guys on this. Okay, Grammar Yuka. Okay. So have you heard of the program called Tokyo Futari Story?
No.
Oh my gosh, people! No, just kidding.
What is it?
It is about the Tokyo. The government is starting a matching program.
Oh,
a dating program. That's right. Sure.
Yeah. Really? Okay, but you didn't know the name. Tokyo Futari, meaning like two people. And I think maybe, they may be using the long time ago, very, popular TV program, Tokyo Love Story. I don't know. You didn't ask me about naming. But anyway, what do you think of that? They spend I think it's 1.2 billion in dollars. So what is that in yen? 120 億? Wait.
Yeah.
12億? Hey, 120億 is too big, huh? But anyway, I thought that they spend 1 billion yen, sorry. So, but then, they're serious about this. They have a 15, a question they have to fill in. You have to prove you're single. And then you have to, provide the government with your income proof. and you have to prove who you are. You said you are. So, because I think it's true that, in Japan, still the kids are born, in the, by the married couple.
Yes.
So the marriage has to come first before they can tackle with the, declining birth rate. So my question is, I think it's money, worthwhile spending. Okay. Did I say it right? But anyway, what do you think of this? Do you think it's just like wasting money, or it's they're on the right path?
Do you want
Is this topic for this room? Sorry if it's not.
No, it's a great question. So legislation is being discussed right now. A budget is being allocated to increase the birth rate. So everybody knows, you hit the nail right on the head. First comes marriage, then comes babies, right? And the Japanese government desperately wants people to have more children. The what is it called? The rate of birth per female in Japan is now at 1.2%. 1.2.
Yes, that's in Japan, right? In Tokyo, below 0.96.
Below, in Tokyo it's even worse. In South Korea, it's far worse than that. In Korea,
yeah, they're doing something about the crazy thing. But anyway, now.
So the Japanese government is trying to do something. They have a minister for revitalizing the birth rate, in fact, and they're devoting money to it. And probably they've encouraged the Tokyo government to have a component of that and also receive federal funds or national funds as a consequence of that. I personally think that the government getting involved in that's something that really should be handled by a private company for profit. Rather than the Japanese government being involved and trying to meet their objectives. But I think they're pulling out all the stops. They don't know how to jigger it. It might be helpful if people got more of a living wage and the economy was better and the yen wasn't so cheap. But they're saying, why don't you get married instead? And so I don't know if it's really the silver bullet that's going to solve this. It is a huge issue. I don't know how they're going to overcome it. It feels to me like it's money being spent. They should have been doing this 20 years ago. Right now, it's awful late. You're reading in the newspaper every week, the birth rate is declining. Of course it's declining, so anyway, that's my take on it. Maya?
Right. Yes. Do I need to comment on this and say that there are so many other issues that need to be resolved before that one is really, is at all.
My application was denied, by the way.
I think those other things can take longer.
Oh yes, sure they will. But if they're not resolved at all, even if they take longer, right? So
I think the Tokyo government, intent is there's a private program. There's so many fraudulent, participants in the program.
I see what you mean. Okay.
So I thought at least they wanted to sort of, make sure, only serious people who are, willing to marry is going to join the program. But anyway, I say longer, spend, too much time on this. Thank you for your, insight. Thank you.
Thanks. And thanks for reflecting once again about Tokyo on Fire.
Yes, thank you. And one more thing, Rumiko actually helped us there about the furusato nōzei system, which we didn't mention. It is a tax deductible expenditure, which means that the companies and individuals who dedicate part of their tax to different regions will have a tax deduction, next year.
And products that you get as a consequence too.
Yes, you've got also gifts, and so this is basically, it is designed to be a win-win situation for all the participants. Yes. Okay, thank you very much for that. And then, it seems that we are about to finish, and Yoshitaka Tori-san, he mentioned a TV drama based on the manga by Simon Fumi. And there is something there. I haven't watched that TV series. I apologize for that. So maybe next time we can talk about it. And then Okay, and then Tokyo on Fire is the best. What can we say? This is from Ryan Banjie. Thank you very
Thank you.
much for the
Thank you.
yes, the shout out, Ryan. Okay, great. With that, Timothy, we have come to the end of the questions. So, to everybody who stayed with us, thank you very much. As you have already heard, the synopsis of these briefings is available usually about around Thursday, the week after. On LinkedIn, it is also sent out via the newsletter of Langley Esquire, the company. So if you wish to subscribe for the written synopsis, please reach out to Timothy or to me so that we can help you with that. And also, Tokyo on Fire is available on YouTube. There are more than 400 episodes there. So all of them, or I would say 99% of them, are evergreen. So you're going to learn a lot if you watch even some of them. And of course, the Japanese Politics One-on-One is available on YouTube at Japan Expert Insights there. And then in closing, once again, I would like to mention our sponsors and thank them, Kanchu.com and Houze. So they support us. They have been supporting our programs for half a month already, and we're very grateful for that. So stay with us, and if you need rehousing, if you need bilingual support to sell or buy property here in Tokyo or in Yokohama, reach out. Find the details in the description of the video on YouTube. And that's all for today. Timothy. Oh,
Thank you very much, Maya. Yes,
thank
I just
you.
want to show people the port here of Hota where I am anchored. And this is where I'm doing my broadcast. All of the Seahawks, you might be able to see them flying around.
Yes,
They're mad at me because I'm on the roof of the Fishermen's Association building, and this is where they usually are unmolested, but they're being
right.
molested today. So as soon as I
Whew.
finish this broadcasting, I'll go back down and hit the sails.
Right.
Is that the word? Unmolested? Okay, I learned something new. Thank you.
Yes, as always. Yes. Okay.
Oh,
Thank you
yeah,
very
always
much.
new. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thanks for the questions, Cam, and everybody who weighed in. Thank you so much. It really enriches the program.
it does. Okay, so we'll see you once again next week at 8 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday, and also 8:20 on Sunday when we'll be here with the 175th episode of Japanese Politics 101.
Wow.
Yes, great. To
175.
everybody, yes, thanks a lot. Stay with us and have a great Sunday and a bright new week.
Thanks, Maya. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Timothy.
You still with me?